got it?
Alright guys, thanks for tuning in. This is Yuval with Yo Miami, and this is My Little Town here on Joel Radio. John, I'm only hearing sound in the left headphone. We're here with Oscar Herrera. Sorry about that, Oscar. Of Spin Alley. So this is episode, I'm gonna say it's 4 or 5. We'll add that when we upload the track, but of our newly formatted show where we expanded a little bit our horizons, and rather than just focusing on comedians, we're talking to various creatives from different fields, but that are subjectively, I feel like, contributing in a positive way to the growth of Miami's cultural renaissance.
Cool.
I think every city is in a constant renaissance, I think. Sorry, just a bit of, there we go. All right. So why don't you know what, let's start with a little taste of what it is you do. We'll let your work speak for itself here at the beginning. So tell us what you brought here, and if you're watching on Facebook, the Facebook live stream, you could see the very awesome looking briefcase,
Yep.
Phonograph, I'm assuming. I can't even call it a record. It's technically a record player.
It's a record player, and it's a phonograph, and it's a gramophone. Any one of those is fine.
There we go. So why don't you tell us, what's special about it, and then maybe if you want, we'll do a quickie with that, and then you could get up, and because you got to go wind the crank, right? You want me to? I could wind it.
Yeah. Well, no, the winding won't take too long. This is actually an RCA Victor record player phonograph from the 30s. Huh. Right before the 30s, there was RCA, which was the Record Corporation of America, and there was Victor. And then RCA bought Victor, and it became RCA Victor. So this record player was typical of something you would have taken to the beach, to a picnic, to your dorm. It requires no electricity. All it requires is some elbow grease and
cool.
to wind it up. So if you want, I could wind it up, and we could play it first.
Yeah, sure. As you get up, how much does that weigh?
It feels like it's about 15 or 20 pounds.
All right. So
The
kind of affordable.
Yeah.
Lightweight for
Oh, you mean
compared to our gramophones today, that literally a phone which weighs in grams.
Right. Yeah, no, but the advantage of this is, as I have used it often, is during hurricane season, like when you have a blackout, like last year. My wife and I have music we can still play, even when the power's out. Yeah. As long as the records are from the 50s and back.
Some candles and your cranker.
That's right.
78s.
So let's
78s.
78s. We're gonna get into all that history because I watched if you guys didn't do your due diligence and watch the little clip that I posted of Oscar explaining a little bit about what he does and all that, then we'll catch them up.
Okay.
So let's hear a little bit of. So you said this 78 is. So what you said the first track is called Miami.
First track, very funny. There's only one track.
Oh, there you go.
Each record has one track on each side.
So let's
So this recording's from the mid-20s, and it's called Miami. So just give me a moment, I'll wind it up.
And while you're doing that, I'm gonna go ahead and give a nice shout out to. I'm holding it up, and I realize that the people listening can't necessarily see me, but. Shout out to J. Wakefield Brewing, the last independent brewery in Wynwood. Yeah, we're drinking some lovely hops for tea right now, IPA. And always helps us ease into the show here with our guests and helps everyone get a little
Right.
So Oscar is cranking. Let's go.
There we go.
Start it up.
take your sunny to your sunny climb. Miami, my Miami, tell my honey, I'll be there on time. Sunlight I'm a shining on the sea, soon it will be shining down on me. My Miami, you belong to me.
All right, that was awesome. I'm sure. I mean, obviously, there's a good handful of you that are listening out there that know me personally, and that's honestly that's music that I listen to on a Saturday while I'm doing work at the home office or whatever. Like maybe not that ragtime, maybe a little bit more, 40s, 60s, like Charlie Parker and Django and maybe a little bit more bluesy jazz and less ragtime, but swing a little. But that's awesome to hear a record that was pressed. So you said in the 30s, 20s,
yeah.
and that the record player was made in the 30s.
Yeah.
And that's something I wanted to get into that you spoke about in that little video clip is how, I guess how important, I was looking for a different word, but how important it is or how much of a difference it can make to listen to records on equipment that was made from the era that record was.
Well, yeah, I'm a firm believer in that. I have the luxury that I pretty much have a player from every era, and a record player. Not everyone does, no. But because of the technology, a record that was recorded, for example, this one, would have been made for a record player of this type, which was before electricity, before electric record players. So the technology that went behind it was to record something that was basically an acoustic thing. The needle was physical, the vibrations were physical, there was no electricity involved, so that was mastered that way. If you played in the 60s and 70s, there were stereos and record players that played 78s. If you played this 78 on one of those, it would sound horrible. Okay. Because it was electric, it was amplifying it, and it would just sound terrible.
They also break when you drop it.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
As John mentioned, they also break really easily if you drop them.
Yeah, these records are made of shellac, shellac or lacquer.
So not even technically vinyl.
No. Vinyl came in the late 40s. Shellac is actually from an Indian insect. I think the lac something.
It's like a beetle.
Just like Gatorade.
Like a beetle, exactly. Yeah. So the material that makes shellac is they have to squeeze a lot of little insects.
Right.
To get the material out.
That's the thing in Gatorade. No, there was a whole thing about that.
Yeah, probably.
Like the blue.
Yeah.
But that's really cool to hear that. I mean, obviously, we're recording a show, so it's not like we're sitting back mellow and like getting to really like, without any interference, absorb the music and kind of take it in as a whole experience. But it's something that I do tend to do both. I mean, at the space, like at Yo Space, people that come out to events, more times than not, you see me, like putting. I'm not, I ain't gunning for John's job by any means, but I'll play full, albums or sides during events. And I think there is something to that in the sense of, there might be a 10-second gap where I'm not paying attention and the record ends and it's quiet, for a little bit and you hear people talking. It's like, oh shit, I have to get on that. But at home, and I have, which is how we met, and actually after the fact how we met, but I have one of your consoles at home, which is one of the cabinet ones. I think it's ours. I'll have to look at the info card that I kept.
I think it was a Magnavox.
Magnavox, you're right. Yeah. Because I had, so I bought it from, shout out to Sweat Records. I ran into Lolo earlier today, but I got it there back in the day when you still have some stuff there, or it's not?
No, I haven't been selling there for about 2 years, but I was selling there for about 5 years.
Yeah, and I mean, so now you're available. We'll plug, the website and everything, but available on your online shop. But that was one of those things where whatever it was at this point, like maybe 4 years ago, 3, 4, 5, whatever it was, years ago, it was, I had some birthday money like put aside, and I was there, and I'm like, oh, that.
Right.
Like it's one of those things where it like speaks to you, or there's like the choir of angels, and you're like.
Now the thing about that you're describing is not. There's no practical reason for actually getting a record player, because unless you get into the argument of downloads sound much worse than an actual record.
Right.
But it's the experience.
Mhm.
So what I'm selling is not just record players or radios. What I'm selling is an experience, and sometimes it's almost a nostalgic experience, even for an era that you didn't experience. So it's more like an idea than, but the idea to be able to sit back and listen to a record and actually have to turn it over,
Right.
and I mean I came from a time when I was in high school, I was a total music nerd, and my idea of
20s, 30s.
yeah. Yeah, right. So I mean, I actually spent a lot of time listening to records in my room, just reading the liner notes, reading along with the lyrics, and that's all I needed. I didn't need anything else. So a lot of people are either rediscovering that or discovering for the first time. That it's not just about clicking through your iPod and song by song
Right.
by song by song.
Or just putting Spotify on, or
Or just
whatever it is,
putting
which I
Spotify
don't
on.
have.
Right, right.
Pandora, let's say, in
Right,
my
right,
case, and
right.
just having it in the background, and whatever, just let it run. You
Right.
know, where it has to ask you, like, hey, are you still listening? You know, 2
Right,
hours in.
right, right. No, it's all about a lifestyle, and I think it's about going back to something more intangible, something where you're trying to just slow down,
Right.
because everything has been sped up so much.
It's very intentional.
Very intentionally trying to slow down, hands on. You have to turn the record over. You have to drop the needle. You know. And,
Well, not in
well,
my case. The auto.
yeah. No, in my case, you have to drop the needle.
So how did you get into originally? Because I thought, you know, so your work, that's not your main job. Let's say it's something that I guess grew out of a hobby or a passion, or you know, the restoring or refurbishing like old records. So how did you initially get into that as something where it's a store, I'm selling thing, you know, like where it wasn't just for yourself or maybe friends or family?
Well, there was the vinyl resurgence, which happened in the early 2000s or 2004. I mean, I had been collecting records all my life, and then I got serious into collecting CDs, and then there was that resurgence. And I remember my very first record I bought after a long period of not buying records was Riot Act by Pearl Jam.
Okay.
I actually got it at a what was that punk store? High.
You mean like
The one that was a mall
in
punk
the malls
store
or whatever?
Yeah.
Wow, shit.
It was at the Falls. It was a.
There's like a handful of comics that have jokes about it, like or
Yeah,
bits
exactly.
about
Well,
it,
anyway,
and-
that store. So,
Yeah.
so I got back to buying records again. It's like, why have I not been doing this? You know, why did I let this span go
Right.
by? So, I started becoming interested in getting an older record player. So I bought one off of eBay, a real cheap little record player from the 50s. And I said, I wonder if I could fix this and make it sound good. And I did. And so I wonder if I could do another one, and then another one. I said, you know, and then I started thinking, well, this is actually enjoyable. You know, I enjoy doing this. I wonder if I can actually put these together and sell them. So that's what I've been doing. It's already been about 10 years of doing that.
That's pretty impressive, and so it wasn't something like, oh, as a kid or your dad or this, like
No,
it was
not at
literally
all.
you were already older, and
Yeah,
I mean
yeah,
like
yeah.
later in life, and
Yeah.
later, I don't know, keep making you sound like a retiree, but you know, you were already, you know, established, you had a
Yes.
job, you know, it's not like, oh, this was always a part of me, and I
Right.
then
Not
you
at
know
all.
what, right.
The only
That-
part of it that was a part of me was the love of music. That's always
Right.
been there.
And so, well, like, let's talk about that a little bit. But I do think that's really interesting. I always kind of had this, like, you know, story painted of you as, like, oh, yeah, as a kid, you used to tinker around with, like,
Right,
you know,
right,
the
electronics
old
and-
radios and all, you know, like, whatever. And that it just kind of grew into, like, oh, let me be more serious about it. So
No,
that's-
actually, when I started doing this, I did find an older gentleman who was in his late 70s, who became kind of my sensei,
Mhm.
and he taught me a lot. He passed away a few years ago, so which was a really big loss. But he started when he was a kid.
So
back-
he was like the Mr. Miyagi, like, OG.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this guy, and he had his own repair shop on Oakland Park Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale, and he closed the shop. And after he closed the shop, he kept working out of his home, and I ended up being his last customer.
Wow.
So yeah, he passed on what knowledge he could to me,
Yeah.
which is very
Well,
cool.
I'm glad we have you to carry on that legacy
Yeah.
now, you know, for the next generation. So let's actually talk a little bit about your love of music and your experience with music aside from this restoring the record players. In that, so you were in a band, are still in a band?
No, not at the moment, but
Uh-huh.
I was in several bands
Uh-huh.
for probably about 20 something years. My father had been involved in show business. He was a singer in the big nightclub scenes in Cuba and Havana in the late 50s. So he sang in Tropicana and the Hotel Nacional and all the big hotels. So I always saw this as, wow, this is like a superhero. This guy actually sings and records records. He actually recorded 2 albums.
Wow.
So I was always exposed to
Did
music.
you have them?
I do have them, yes. And they're, you can actually find them on eBay every now and then.
Nice.
And all his stuff has been reissued on CD.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is really weird. But growing up, I was always exposed to music, and then I started getting into music. And my ultimate dream was to become a rock star, which never happened. But I was in several local bands.
Right.
So the love of music has never been lost. That's always been there. And I try to keep up with what's happening. I listen to music with my kids. You know, they keep me young as far as that's concerned. We go to festivals together and continue listening to what's happening.
Awesome.
Not like a lot of my peers who stopped somewhere around the 80s. As far as listening to
The years.
new music, yes.
It's not at eight.
Not their age. No. The year is the decade.
And then, so I know that kind of got transmitted. In your case, like, so your daughter is also now a musician, right?
She's actually sung on one of the acts that I sang for over 10 years, Black Tape for a Blue Girl, which is international. They're a dark wave goth band, and I recorded them for many years. And then last year, she actually sang with me on one of the albums, and now this year, a new one has just been released that she's singing on.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Like with that same band?
Yes.
Or-
Yes.
nice.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So keep maybe in another 20, 30 years, she'll start tinkering with record players.
Yeah. And then my son does music on his own, and he's released stuff on. He has stuff on Spotify, on Bandcamp, and things like that. So it's in the blood. You can't get it out of your system.
Exactly, and I think I was going to actually mention that when you talked about your dad and that experience in the nightclub scene in Cuba, where I feel like having parents who actually were able to succeed, or depend, to different definitions of what success is, but that were able to show their kids that there is a viable future,
Right.
In terms of career in an industry like the music industry, or whether it's hospitality, restaurant, or I feel like that's a big factor a lot of times when you see the people who then go on to make it, or to any degree, if it's like on a local level or on a national, international level, they always had that kind of early influence or that
Right.
early example
Right.
of maybe they didn't make it all the way to the top, but look, they got a foothold in, so I gotta try. And then when maybe that makes them start from a younger age because they have that example, and so
Right.
they get more. More.
Right. Yeah, both of my kids have been listening to music since they were born.
Right.
I mean, early everything. So.
And so is it more? That's what I was gonna say. Is it more like, I know you're into punk? Like, is it? Are you kind of all over the genre spectrum?
All over
or-
the genre. Yeah.
I mean, I guess everything from 1920s
Yeah.
ragtime jazz.
For some reason, I have an affinity for that era, the 20s,
Uh-huh.
the jazz age, what they call the jazz age, and I've had that since I was a kid in high school. I
Mhm.
got into F. Scott Fitzgerald and Great Gatsby and all that kind of stuff, and I somehow associate with that era, although I love music from all eras and I've listened to everything, and none of the bands I ever played with played ragtime.
Right.
But
it's never too late.
yeah, that's true. But there's something about that era that speaks to me.
Nice.
The elegance of the era.
Yeah, it's that that golden mystique of like
Plus-
the Midnight in Paris.
Yeah.
the
No, and
effect.
the automobiles from that era are beautiful too.
Sure. Right.
Yeah.
Well, which that also. But so you grew up in Cuba, or?
No. I was born in Cuba. I left when I was a baby. I was raised
so
in
you
Miami.
didn't, you didn't experience the cars over there.
No.
I was gonna say, like, at least that
No.
those two aspects. So you've been doing this, like you said, about 10 years now.
Mhm.
Is this something that you see eventually, like, or is it a goal of yours to eventually scale up and make this where it's more of like, you're gonna open a shop and you're gonna, like.
My fantasy is to open a shop, and it has been for several years. It's just very difficult. I mean, especially with rent, what it is, and the location and everything. And is it a viable business to be able to have a shop?
Right.
So, right now my shop is my home, and that's where I work out of, and my shop is online. My
Right.
website, eBay, and Etsy,
Which-
and those kind of things.
What's the website?
SpinAlleyStore.com.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I have been fortunate enough to see your shop at your house, and it's definitely a little museum of wonders unto itself.
Yeah,
yeah.
And then in a shameless plug, I would like to say that some of the local celebrities have been my clients, starting with yourself.
Oh.
Are you a local
If
celebrity?
that's where you're setting the bar.
No. Well, I mean, let's see. We also have Matt Kushner from Kush.
Oh.
Kush.
That's not a record. I was singing the Captain Kush suitcase.
No, not the Captain Kush suitcase, but he did buy a record player from me.
Nice.
Which I think he said it was one of his happiest purchases he ever made. DJ Spam. I restored one of his record players.
Nice.
And a few years ago, an assistant came into Sweat Records to buy a record player for a mysterious person, and a mysterious person turned out to be Gabrielle Union.
Oh.
So she was buying a record player for
It's
Dwayne
at
Wade.
D-Wade's house,
It's
yeah.
at D-Wade's house. I have a photo. I have proof. This
Nice.
is true. So yeah, celebrity to the stars. I mean, record player restored to the stars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so that's the funny thing, which I'm gonna shout myself out for. I don't know how you didn't use the spin doctor up until this point. I thought it was just being
really
corny
cool,
and
yeah.
like cliche and like you've heard it 1,000 times.
No, I don't know why no one's ever mentioned, but I think it's great. Yeah.
But so talking a little bit about that and the resurgence of vinyl and all those kinds of things. I mean, I know we just mentioned there's a vinyl shop here. There's Sweat. There's like Technique now. There's 1-800-Lucky. There's like a lot more, at least from what I was aware of as a kid. There's a lot more options and more stores popping up. Let's say in the last 3 to 4 years than I was aware of my whole rest of my life in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
So funny thing is, I see. So you know the paper, the Biscayne Times.
I've never
like
heard of it. I
But
mean, I've
it's
heard
like,
of it. Yeah.
so it's like a local. They cover kind of North Miami, Miami Shores, like all that area mostly. Was at like the Daily or whatever, and I pick up a copy, and because on the front page, what do I see? What looks like exactly the same console that I bought, that you had worked on. Same color, same, roughly look like the same dimensions. I didn't see what kind of turntable was inside, but from the outside, and I'm like, oh, is this about Oscar? And it was something about like, oh, you're bringing back to life old things, whatever, and talked about this guy who was not Oscar Herrera, but that was doing what you're doing in the sense of restoring. I have to. I'm going to find it and send it to you now. So
Are you saying I have competition?
Oh, you did big competition.
I gotta find out who this guy is.
They got articles, but no, that was kind of something that stuck in my mind of like, oh, there are other people, like there must be a demand, and I think it's maybe more coming from people who are rediscovering it, who maybe they're getting ones that remind them of the ones they had when they were younger and things like that. But it's also very much like the hipster effect of vinyl is coming back, and I want to get the cool, cool record player, and not like, I'm not gonna say for me it wasn't like, oh, that's gonna look cool or whatever, but there's definitely also the auto, Stack-Fi records, and like there was different reasons, but yeah. You didn't see that article obviously, but like, is it something maybe online or through like our materials? Because I know obviously some like the tubes, the transistors, tubes, whatever, the internal guts of these machines, some of which run on technology that isn't, that doesn't exist today or isn't being produced today. Have you noticed supply of certain things kind of like becoming harder to come by? Like,
not at all. Actually, there are a lot of people, and I have a lot of vendors that I deal with on a regular basis who sell the material. There are companies out there who are actually making reproduction graphics, because a lot of these record players had decals, like the RCA Victor had the Nipper, the dog, and all these kind of things. And if you buy an old record player where the label has worn off, there are actually companies out there recreating these labels. And
but that's easy. That's a sticker.
The dial covers. As far as tubes are concerned, most of what I buy are called new old stock. So what that means is a radio repair shop closed in the 60s in New York. They sold everything they had in the original packages to somebody, and those things are still in their original package. So that's what I've been buying. So I keep having this fear of the future of the apocalypse, where all these tubes will finally run out, and all these needles will finally run out, and you won't be able to get it.
Because even the needles, like there's for certain eras, like you can't use a contemporary needle.
Exactly.
Or it won't sound
exactly. Actually, the needles for this record player, which are made out of steel, they are being made. You can buy them as brand new packages, and they come.
And do you attribute that to this new, interest in that? Like
yeah, because people are collecting. I mean, there's a whole there's a whole market of people who buy old record players and phonographs, and that's all, and that's what they need. So they need these needles, by the way, these steel needles on these older acoustic record players. You have to change them after every record because they wore down.
Wow.
So that's why you get them in packages of 100.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So after every record, you have to
John,
take it out and put in another one.
John, every record you played, you have to change the needle. I've only had to change mine once,
I'm going for
and already I'm like, I never want to do this again because I'm so scared I'm gonna like mess something up or
Yeah.
break it or.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's fun. But yeah, that's all kind of, I guess, what I was driving at is that eventual like apocalypse that's gonna happen of, well, all the shops and all
Right.
the inventory that went.
It's gone.
That's it.
Right. I don't think it'll be in my lifetime, so I'm not worried. Too worried.
So that's good. You know, we at least we have that. We have you covered. At
Yeah,
least. So the other thing that I wanted to touch on a little bit, talking about a little bit, mixing the contemporary with the first of all, I do want to ask because there's those photographs that are on the inside of that
I bought that.
record player. Were those in there?
Yeah, that was in there. Whoever had that was a traveler, and there were stickers from hotels that he stayed in.
Oh, but I thought it was like family pictures.
No.
It was like,
No. There's stickers from hotels.
Oh, that's funny. They're like pinup, like 1920s,
Right.
1930s
Right.
pinup
Yeah.
stickers.
Not family photos. Yeah.
They're more dressed than I would attribute a pinup to be, so I get, but I guess for the time.
Yeah.
So the question I have is, what's your view? Because I'm even like internally conflicted as I think about it on, you know, taking something like this briefcase, suitcase, or like a console that I have, you know, which is more of like a cabinet, self-contained unit, on people customizing. I guess there's kind of, you know, we talked about cars, and I feel like there's this same philosophy or, you know, philosophical question that can come up with cars on like, everything stock, or do you upgrade it and tweak it and customize it?
I don't customize it. I don't tweak it. I try to keep everything as original as possible. I understand. I mean, there are customers who would like to tweak things. I don't do that. I mean, some people will buy an old radio and make it iPod friendly. I actually have one for sale.
Okay.
That you can actually connect your iPod and listen to your iPod through this old radio, which is cool. But that's because I got it that way from eBay. But I myself don't do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it. It's just a personal thing.
Right.
I mean, I'm not gonna get a wind-up phonograph and electrify it.
Right.
Yeah. So that's just a personal thing. Once you buy it, you can do whatever you want with it. But I myself, even if I were restoring old cars, I would want them to look exactly like they did when they left the showroom.
So you're a purist.
A purist. Yes. No mag wheels, no modern engine, and I know that's cool.
Right.
Maybe people think that's cool, and in a way, sometimes you have to do it to make it operate.
Right.
But for the most part, yes, a purist.
And so, I mean, I'm glad we answered that, but my question was more from an aesthetic point of view. Like, especially now, you have a lot of, like, you know, artists, obviously. Like, my background, you know, it's something that that I deal with. But, for example, if I were to take, because it's something I thought about, and I had different, you know, a couple different artists in mind, and I'm like, oh, do I want to? It's kind of, you can't go back once you do it. But, like, of having an artist like paint something on the cabinet, or for I don't know if you know the artist Alex Yanes. So well, he's down in South Miami. He does a lot of work with like wood cutouts, very bright, vibrant like characters and things like that out of wood cutouts, like almost like collage, like layered. And he's done a few. I mean, he's done a handful, like, or more than a handful of audio inclusive, like kind of sculptures that where you can plug in your iPhone or Bluetooth. But he's done also some record consoles where he's gotten like bigger than the one I have, where it's like it's kind of like a TV console, not obviously for TVs, but like that size, where you have like a record player in the middle, and sometimes you have, you know, the radio or whatever it is. So I know he's taken like one or two of those and decked it out. And while you're answering, I'm gonna maybe try and look up a picture so I could show you. But is that in the same vein for you, where it might not, you know, it doesn't necessarily affect the mechanics?
It won't affect the mechanics. No, it's not to my taste. I wouldn't do it for myself. But I mean, if I sell one to someone and they want to do it, you know, it's their prerogative.
Right, but it's not something where you would be like, oh, I should do a limited artist edition collab, whatever. Right.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do that myself.
Yeah.
No.
But see, yeah, it's an interesting thing to me, like the idea of the puritanical classicism.
Purity.
Purity.
Yeah.
I guess pureness, purity, whatever. Of any art form, because you have the same thing with the visual arts, and that's kind of what I connected to, I think, in some way, where you have, I know artists who are classically trained and, oil paint and who, use Renaissance techniques and blah, blah, blah. And there's artists who do that and they're great at that, and that's what they do, and they paint basically the same things that you'll go see in museums
No,
or whatever.
I think in that case, once you've learned the basics and you're classically trained, it's cool to break out.
Well, so why for one and not the other?
Very, very good question. I can't tell
We're
you.
gonna dig deep here.
Yeah, because I'm not expressing myself with record players, or I'm just restoring them and trying to keep them in their original form and trying to make them look like you just bought them at a showroom in 1935.
So
Whereas
you are expressing yourself because you want people to connect with the past.
I want them to connect with that past, and and if you buy that record player and then it's been painted, with a bunch of graffiti, you're not connecting with the past. You're connecting with past and present. So, I mean, what you do with it when you buy it, that's up to you. But as far as being a classically trained artist and painter, as most painters were, I mean, you take someone like Picasso and they think he's always painted that way. But if you see his early stuff, he is classically trained. But then he broke out of that. But that's a different animal. Exactly. I think that's a different animal. That's actually someone expressing themselves.
Right, and so I guess in your case, it's not like you're building it from scratch and let me make it the way I want, and I want a fender here and I want whatever. I guess you're kind of, what's the word, it's almost like, what's the estate person who, after someone passes away, they, are just in charge of, transferring the possessions to the...
Yeah, someone's in charge of an estate sale. Yeah, I don't know.
Not an estate sale, like an estate lawyer, I guess, whatever, but someone who's basically in charge of passing on something that is not mine and passing it to someone who is not me, and just kind of being the messenger.
I had a customer who bought who had a Grundig stereo console. Grundig is a German brand, high end. This one was from the 60s, so it's really, really elegant looking. Like blonde wood, something you would imagine in a bachelor pad in the 60s. And he wanted it because his house was being decorated in that style, mid-century. Right. So that's the era he's trying to evoke. So, in those cases, that's why I'm trying to sell something that belongs to that era. To take that Grundig and paint it over would have been an insult.
Right, it's one of those things that's painful to you.
Painful, very painful, because there were craftsmen and engineers who put that thing together, and it wasn't meant to be just splashed on with paint.
Right.
So I mean, I don't think it's a right or wrong. That's just the way I feel about it.
Right, it's subjective, and it's just for you. It's not why you got into it, and it doesn't reflect your intentions in doing it.
Right.
Understand. All right. I should respect that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about. So you're having a little shindig.
A shindig.
In 2 days.
On
5 days.
Sunday.
Yeah.
It's first annual open house. I don't know if that means it will be a second annual, but
we'll see how the first one goes.
We'll see how the first one goes. So since I don't have a physical store, this will be a chance for people to actually come by and see the equipment and see it in its environment.
Can you clean up the garage a little?
Yeah, no, I don't know if I'm going to show that garage. I made two, a select few. Yeah, the garage is full of things that are waiting to be restored. It
definitely looks like an outtake from an episode of Hoarders.
Right, it's kind of like a morgue where the dead bodies are actually waiting to be revived rather than buried. So that's what that is. Yeah, we're going to have a whole afternoon from 1 to 6. We're going to have the radios and record players that have restored available for sale. We're going to have Spin Alley swag, which includes T-shirts and cushions and coffee mugs and posters, everything that envelops that lifestyle, or that thinking of those eras, having things that evoke that nostalgia for those eras. We're gonna have beer and coffee and wine and snacks, and there'll be music. I'm thinking I'm having music playing in pretty much every room.
Get the band back together?
No, not for this. No.
That's too rowdy.
Yeah, so we'll have my man cave. We'll be playing one sort of music, and then the living room will have something else, and try to make it like different rooms.
Ambiance that goes with the room.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, it goes without saying that every, at least recorded music, that's playing will be doing so on
And it's appropriate equipment. Yes, exactly.
It's funny because it makes me think. So like with beer nerds, there's proper glassware.
Yeah.
Is like a hashtag or whatever,
Yeah.
like using the right glass to serve different styles of beer. And it's the same principle.
And we are encouraging people to show up in the dress of their favorite musical era.
So there you go.
So so hopefully we'll have hippies and beatniks and Bobby Soxters and jazz hepcats and or not,
Right. Or it's just gonna be you and the fam, like
exactly. Yeah. What was it?
just listening to music.
Yeah. We'll see.
No, but hopefully, we'll get you the bump. We'll get you a couple people out of this at least.
No, I mean, on Facebook, I know 8 people who are definitely going.
No, right. I'm saying, aside from whoever you're already, you're already polling, I'll give
Right.
a little, just a fluff of like 2 people.
Right.
No, but I wanted to ask John, just because I always like to bust his balls off on the microphone. I want to know if he has any questions for you, being that he, it's his job to be around vinyl, and not always, but vinyl and turntables and that kind of thing. He didn't know that I was going to ask him this, but what do you want to ask Oscar today about vintage audio equipment?
There's a lot.
Or what's a problem that you experience with modern equipment, or something that you think justified? I mean, look, as a DJ working a gig, there's different needs. You're not gonna sit there and crank the handle. You're not gonna. I mean, that'd be kind of fun for one
There
show.
are a pair of DJs in New York who DJ on
Of course,
that
they're
stuff.
in New York.
On these, I'm
they,
sure.
Yeah, they mix between 2 wind-up turntables. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Look them up on YouTube.
There's also a guy that does tape DJ sets. Awesome tapes from Africa.
Is
Yeah.
it
Shout outs.
who?
He
It was, Greg.
runs a label, Awesome Tapes from Africa. But anyway, I do. Actually, I ran into, I don't know if you're aware of these settings or whatnot, but it would be probably very helpful for many. The quadraphonic setup
Yes.
on a, let's say, an old integrated or vintage integrated amplifier. Do you need another amp to power that particular amp to be able to get that quadraphonic sound?
Now you're dragging me into the 70s.
And by the way, this is just for you and your fan base, John, because I have no idea what the fuck
I
you're
don't
talking
know if
about.
I can answer that question intelligently. I would assume that if you get a quadraphonic amplifier, it's all inclusive. It's got everything in it that you would need for the whole system. But everything that I restore is before that.
Before that, right?
Oh, which I know
It's
because
a
I brought him
funky time.
a turntable from, well, it was the 70s, right?
Right.
I forgot what brand it was, but it was like a cheap brand.
Yeah, I've always ran into that problem, and I found that a lot of people do try and get rid of a lot of quadraphonic amps, and I'm thinking it's because they don't know how to run them properly.
That's probably the case.
Yeah, and it's a whole different ballgame because it's so analog at the time. I guess the setup or the structure of the design of where the sound's going to flow through, that I think it just activates one side, and a lot of people are like, man, I can't get this Klipsch sound system to work, and it's because they haven't really jumped.
I think
the power on these
you need to
amps.
get the amplifier that was made for the quadraphonic. And for those out there who have no
See?
idea what quadraphonic is,
No. Well,
for a
sound.
very brief moment, there was this high-end stereo system called, not stereo, quadraphonic, because it wasn't 2, it was 4 channels.
Mhm.
Surround sound is what we're supposed to do, and it was going to be the future, and it never really took off. I have a friend who...
But did it sound good, or like...
Yeah, it sounded good, but for some reason, it never took off. I mean,
It's just too complicated.
Beta
or
looked
too expensive?
Beta looked better than VHS, but Beta didn't take off.
Right, or like Laserdisc and DVD.
Laserdisc
Just
never
who brought...
took off.
There's like that. There's this thing on. You could see it on Netflix where it's like the greatest like rivalries of
Right.
science and innovation, and there's this one about RCA, and
Columbia. Probably
Is it-
Columbia.
it's the one where when they jumped to TVs from radios,
Uh,
but it incorporated some of the technology from radios that obviously RCA held all the patents for.
Alright.
So basically, RCA throttled the guy who came up with the better version of like a TV back in the day by saying, if you, manufacturer, who's making this, like it was the tubes, I think it was something like that, if you manufacturer who is a licensee of our patent for this technology for these tubes, if you sell them to whoever it was, Columbia or whoever it was, we're gonna they're gonna take action basically, and they're gonna stop allowing you to make it or whatever it was.
That's how those things happen.
And they basically starved the guy out for like the 7 years that it needed him, and held him up in court and whatever, until it was like, oh well, your patent that you filed for your TV technology that needed our tubes
Right.
is now public domain. So now we're gonna start making. Okay, you could go ahead now, but then at that point they have the whole machine behind it, and meanwhile the whole time they're trying to like replicate and make the technology better, and then they can't. So then they just basically wait them out.
Yeah, the format wars in technology have been going back a long way. In the record player industry, it started with Edison. The very first record player was 1877, and it was on tinfoil, and it was on a cylinder.
What? Like tinfoil, like we have today, tinfoil?
Tinfoil, yes. So the needle scratched on the tinfoil, and the tinfoil played back. It was a tinfoil player. The very first thing he recorded was Mary Had a Little Lamb on it. So that was a cylinder player. And then a few years later, this German M.L. Berliner came up with a disc. So there was a format war.
Oh, right.
They actually
look like a tube.
They look like
cylinder,
your tissue roll.
Right,
you know,
right,
when
right.
you're done with the toilet paper.
Right.
Kind of.
Right.
Yeah,
And so
and it just
for years there was a war between Edison and anybody else who had the disc player, and the disc players eventually won out. Victor Records, which became RCA Victor, is called Victor because they were the victor in this war.
Crazy.
In this war. And Edison finally started making discs late in the game, in I think the late 20s, early 30s, and by that point nobody cared.
Right.
It's crazy how and sorry to, this is probably a little off topic, but now you bring up Edison. It's like Edison really went into lots of battles with a lot of people and failed miserably. Failed miserably, and is so idolized.
Yeah, no, Edison was an evil creep.
He was an evil creep. He was like a Trump of his times. I guess. Let me just say it.
Don't give
Trump
just
that
saying,
much credit. But, I mean,
Edison did invent some shit at least.
Well, yeah, that's true. But very, very business oriented, more than what it was to, like, let's say a Nikola Tesla that was giving more to the community than he was just saying, let me build a new house in Naples, you know. Just because.
Well, there was that format war between AC and DC, and the electricity.
Yeah, the AC and DC.
And he would test electricity on animals, on horses, and elephants. Yeah, and so a lot of things he took credit for that actually had been invented by somebody else, and then he developed. I think the light bulb was one of them. But
they say it's not who does it first; it's who's become known for it.
Right.
First.
Well, I mean, he was an egomaniac because on the containers, which would be like a record cover for his cylinders, there was a tube. Was his face. That was his logo.
Right.
His face. So then the next big format war, the disc won that format war. The next big format war was at the end of the 40s, in 1948. Columbia introduced the LP, the long play. Before that, albums. The word album was literally an album. It was a book that had 4 or 5 pages, and each page held a record. So you have 4 or 5 records with 2 sides, and that was literally an album.
I never put that together.
So you would have to stack them together, and you would have to play it. And then Columbia came out with a 45. Said, well, we can take those 8 or 10 songs and put 4 on each side or 5 on each side, and that.
Oh, because then it was one song each disc.
Yeah, those discs were one song on each side for the longest time, from the beginning, from early 1900s to the 20s, all the way to 48.
So each side was like a 3-minute or 4-minute, or they were
it
just
was
10
a 3-minute. That's why later some of the lingo continues where you say I'm going to record a song. People in the 50s and 60s were still saying I'm going to record a side. We recorded a couple of sides. They weren't literal sides anymore, but that language stayed. So we're recording. I'm going to, I just recorded some stuff on wax. Why wax? Because the original records were wax. The original records in the 20s were all acoustic. It was a band in front of this giant horn. The horn went down to this needle, and at the end of the needle was a disc with wax on it.
Right.
They would record it, and they would take that wax.
I just got the technology. So basically, the needle would vibrate based on the
scratch
sounds,
the wax, and from that wax, they would make the master.
Like I knew the
metal
groove
plate.
and that area.
Right. So like when you talk about wax on tracks, I put something on wax. That's where that technology comes from.
Term came from, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, that's like now with the icons on the. This example always comes up. What is it on the iPhone that there's like an icon for something, and it's because of like the Windows icons. Is it save or like where it's a folder? And like it's like why is like kids today don't get what
The
that
concept.
is. They
Oh,
just
right.
get that icon means this, but they
This,
don't
yeah.
know why it's that.
Yeah, I mean, you have an
Oh, yeah.
icon of a folder. It's like, who uses folders anymore?
Right.
Who
Yeah.
stores things in file cabinets?
Right.
But it's probably to prove. It's kind of like, well, we do it for you. Why are
Right.
you gonna do it?
So the next format were when they introduce Columbia introduces the LP, and a year later RCA Victor introduces the 45, and RCA Victor said, well, we're going to sell a lot of singles. You know, it was 7-inch.
Right. The idea is
Back
what
to the
you-
idea of one song on
smaller,
each side,
cheaper, yeah.
and they made these little record players which only played 45s. And so there was this war back and forth and back and forth. And the record player manufacturing company said this is ridiculous. So they ended up making players that played all the formats.
Right.
It's like if you had a VCR that played VHS and Beta.
Yeah.
You know, they would play both formats. No matter what you had, you would play. But the thing with the 45s is that at this point, for the first time in history, in the late 40s and the 50s, the teenager was becoming the record buying
So it was
public.
like the single.
The single.
pop
Before
single.
that, it was the classical guy and the jazz dude, and sitting
They're
back.
like more like audiophile.
audiophile people, and suddenly, with Frank Sinatra and the Bobby Soxers in the 50s and 60s, the 45 became a thing, and from that point on, it was the teenager driving the market.
So that's why they kept both eventually,
Right.
because you had like, let me
Right.
keep the old folks happy, because
Right.
then let them keep buying. But
Also
Yeah, this
speeds
for
like the
33,
45 and
45,
33, even for like audiophiles or people. Oh, that's pressed on 45. You could play it on a 45 speed versus a 33 and like a slow burner or
Yeah.
So that's my
it's,
question,
It's a lot of
because
detail.
I have.
Does
think
yours
it's
have
just
Does yours have 16? Your console, the one you got?
I think so.
Because some of the players in the 60s and
The speed, you're
70s
saying?
had 33, 70, 45, and 16.
My wife's listening, so Lori, if you're by the record player, feel free to shoot me
A lot of them
text
had
on
16,
what
and-
speed settings.
And 16 was the slowest, and those were made.
It's just 33.
Okay. Yeah, 16 was made for records that had speeches on.
Oh, it's
So you would,
slow,
like
isn't it?
I said, I had to buy. I once bought a 16 album set, and it's the New Testament
Right.
on 16, and it plays really slow. And got every single chapter of the New Testament on it.
So that's like your Sundays. You just go through the album.
Yes, yeah. I spend my
Soak it
time
in.
listening to the New Testament on 16. Come by on Sunday for real
On the
fun.
25th.
We'll play the New Testament for you.
If you come out for the early VIP sneak preview.
If you dress like Jesus, you'll get more beer.
No, wine, man. Keep it.
Oh, that's right. They didn't have. Oh, yeah.
Or
yeah,
mead.
they
They
had-
had beer,
What do
but
you
I'm
need?
saying turn water into wine.
Okay, wine. Okay, sorry. Yeah, wine.
But so that's a question I have actually, because I do have. I think it's just the one. Yes. Oh, there is 16. I'm sorry.
You see?
I've been corrected.
Just go on
Thank you,
eBay,
Mike.
just buy a 16 RPM record so you say you have one and just
I'm just
play
gonna
it.
come on Sunday and I'll borrow it from you.
Yeah, well, that's the New Testament together. Okay.
Give me a
New
punch
Testament
out, a
listening.
checkout, a library card.
We should come by and stream it.
Sermon on the Mount is at 2 o'clock, so be sure to show up.
But so okay, the question that I have is, I think it's just the one record that I have. I think it's like it's not the reissue, but it's like the posthumous, like Amy Winehouse, the Hidden Treasures or Lioness.
Oh, yeah, the Linus, yeah, something, yeah.
So that album,
Mhm.
it's not an album, is a 12-inch.
Right,
So LP doesn't refer to the size, or it does.
it does.
So if it's a 12 inch,
Actually,
it's an LP.
in most cases it does, but there were 10-inch LPs also. LP means long playing.
So that's my question.
Long
is
playing
this-
means 33.
right.
So
So
it could be any
the
size.
speed, 33 being the speed, 33 rotations per minute.
It's actually 33 and a third rotation.
Right.
That's a big.
But
Yeah.
well,
No, that's
well,
common.
this
It's
is
33.
is not dependent on the size of the record,
Correct.
which is what I always thought. I'm like, oh, it's smaller, so you gotta turn it fat. You know what I
No.
mean? Like I'm like,
No,
not
there-
that I thought deeply about it, but
There are EPs, which means extended play. There's LP, long play, extended
I
play.
thought it was early play.
No.
Like, because it's before the whole album comes
No,
out.
no. EP means extended play. So you have singles, extended play, and LP, long play. So extended play in most cases was 10 inches. A lot of times, most of the times it was 45 RPM, but a lot of times it was 33. So you could get a 10-inch EP, and it was still considered an LP.
But so what's the extended signify? Like, why extended play?
It was a sales marketing thing. So you liked the new Nat King Cole song or this other new Nat King Cole song, but you didn't want to dish out a whole money for a whole album, so let me just get four songs on an EP.
So because it wasn't one track, it was a couple.
It was 4 songs, and
So
sometimes it
Some
was.
of them even come in 3, so you have a 45 and 2 on 33 on the other side.
Exactly.
That's a new format, I guess, or it's applied a whole lot more.
To
maybe like dance music.
to illustrate how interactive the record listening experience can be, Godspeed You Black Emperor,
Mm-hmm.
totally modern band. They have an album where side A is on an LP at 33, side B is on a 45, side C is back on the second side of the
Like
LP,
just to fuck with you.
and side D is on the second side of the 45.
Right.
So, yeah, so it's like, oh, I really have to get up and turn this around and change the speed and everything. So,
Right.
so they're like, you're listening, right? You're listening to this record.
Exactly.
You're
It's like,
involved.
yeah, I want to make sure you're paying attention.
You're involved.
That's funny. Which that actually brings me to one question. How we do have to wrap up, but have you ever heard it's like a more recent like Gil Scott Heron album that I'm not gonna remember the name, but the cover is like his face in it.
I know of it. I haven't listened.
But
to it.
so I think because this idea of experiencing in every sense of what that means a record as opposed to just listening to music, he has like some monologues on that album, and then it's also like printed on the inside cover, which is basically that, like, turn off your phone, tell your spouse to like not bother you, like basically turn off the world and like sit down, focus, and listen to this record. Like
that's a good point, and that brings me to challenge all you millennials out there. The White Album was just reissued. Take the White Album, turn off your phone, tell your mom not to bother you or whoever you're living with, sit down in a dark room or have a light so you can read the lyrics, but listen to the White Album side by side. Each side has its own personality. So that's the way I experienced it, and it was mind blowing. And it's not going through Spotify and going through fast tracks and everything. It's just each side has it's like taking a little journey. You're in this, listening to these lyrics. I mean, reading these lyrics. It's it's not tiny on a CD. It's an album, and it was meant to be a work of art. It's meant, the artist is saying, "This is me. This is where we are at this point. I'm taking you from this side to this side, and now we're going here, and now we're going here."
Right.
That's the White Album is a perfect example. I mean, The Wall by Pink Floyd. They're meant to be absorbed by yourself or with a friend.
Right. In other words, but it's meant to be a fully immersive experience in the sense
Exactly.
of there's the visual, there's the conceptual, the thought, like the kind of the explanation that's in there. And I do that not admittedly every time I put a record on. I'm like sitting and I'm studying and I'm like, I'm really like into it, but yeah, I think every now and then it's important. You notice like, oh, this musician played backup on this album, like they're on this one.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You start making those connections. I mean, there are credits. You start reading the credits. Like, wait, I saw this guy's name somewhere else. Oh, he's associated with so and so. It's like all these things start happening. All the the liner notes are great. I love liner notes.
Which I'm gonna shout out also because I've been listening to lately so there's like the Billy Joel station on Sirius XM where it's like him like talking about like basically there's anecdotes by him, like his daughter or whatever, talking about kind of the inspirations and the process that went into like different songs and like things like that, and it's really I guess obviously everyone is gonna relate more if it's an artist that they're into specifically, but I feel like it's that experience is a way that now in the contemporary form like of a satellite radio station is a way that they're kind of drawing that connective line to that experience of the album is like in between the songs you're hearing the artist tell you like this great like I was like I was just whistling just because this one I heard it just recently, but like on The Stranger how there's that whistle after the piano
it's a beautiful
intro.
whistle.
He was just talking to whoever was the producer, the manager that was in the studio, and as he was like getting ready to record that song, he's like, have this theme to the song, like, so I guess he wrote all his music as opposed to doing the lyrics and then putting the music, so he wrote the music and then came up with the lyrics. He was like, have this theme for the song, and I need to find another instrument to come in after the piano, and like he just whistled the so like he just whistles that to the producer, whoever it is. He's like, that's it. That's the instrument.
And it's actually the best part of the song.
Yeah, and that's what he said, is it ended up being perfect, so you don't know like where that stuff's going to come from. I'm going to end on the name of that album is Gil Scott Heron, I'm New Here, 2010. Check it out. Listeners also, but I'll send you also. So just remind us, November 25th, Sunday.
Sunday 1 to 6. Come dress as your favorite musical era if you feel brave.
And where can people find the info, like address and all that stuff?
SpinAlleyStore.com. Spin Alley Store has a Facebook page. We have an Instagram page. But if you go to SpinAlleyStore.com, there's contact information. On the home page of Spin Alley Store, there's a little flyer thing on the top with the address and all the information that we do.
Cool. Check out their store also. The record players are not as astronomically priced as you would probably imagine listening to these conversations, but yeah, go out, buy one, support. Shout out again to Jay Wakefield for the brews, to John for stepping in on the show and working his magic behind the tables, Joel Radio. As always, I'm Yuval Ophir. This has been My Little Town. Check us out, Yo Miami, Yo Space, Little Haiti Mural Project, shout out, because we just started a mural with Ivan Roque out there in the neighborhood. And come out to our 7-year anniversary at Yo Space, December 9th, closing out Basel. And we'll have an exhibition called The Sign of the Times, all portraits painted by mostly local artists on street signs of iconic figures, including some like Django Reinhardt
Oh, cool.
and Moody Blues and things like that.
Cool.
Stream on.
Is it that? Is it stream on? What is it?
Stream on,
What did
yeah.
it say?
That was cool.
Man. Thank you, man.